Good morning, and welcome to the Michael Badaway Show on this your Tuesday, April 14th edition. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. Michael Badaway with you. Glad to be here bright and early. Didn't know if I was going to enjoy getting out of bed this morning, but you know what? It's nice to have a semblance of order, even if it's, well, very little order. Nevertheless, any little bit helps in these trying times. So, let's get to it. There's lots going on in the world today, lots of cool stuff to talk about. In history, actually, it's a pretty big day in history. Today's the day that U.S. President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. So that's kind of a bad day in history, but an historic day nonetheless. And Lincoln, of course, famous for ending slavery in the South. So pretty important guy in terms of United States history and whatnot. And of course, there are neighbors to the south, so it matters to us as well. The Titanic also is in history today. The Titanic, famous ship, hit the iceberg this day in 1912. Can you imagine 108 years ago now that the Titanic sank? Apparently, it was traveling about 22 knots. It was somewhat close to the east coast of Canada, not quite, but it was in the North Atlantic, and it took a few hours to go down, but the unsinkable ship did in fact go down. That's the problem with mankind and our vast hubris. We tend to think very highly of ourselves, and then we tempt fate. We go around saying things like, this is an unsinkable ship. Well, clearly we found out that that was not the case. Also, today in 1828, Webster's Dictionary was first published. I wonder what Mr. Webster would be thinking in his grave. He'd probably be going, WTF and all that nonsense, wondering what the heck is going on with these non-words that were sticking in the dictionary. It's absolute nonsense. I could have a conversation with you now using only acronyms. I don't know what that says for the future of communication. Nevertheless, it's kind of disturbing. People aren't really learning grammar anymore. Nobody can put a sentence together. LOL, right? LOL. Those grocery store apps? Well, COVID-19 upon us. Maybe not a bad idea to download one of these apps. So if you've not heard of it, what you can do is from your smartphone, you download, your Loblaws app or your Sobeys or what have you, Metro, and you simply order your groceries through the app and you do carry or collect. So you show up at the grocery store at an allotted time, you pull up to the door, you don't even get out of your car, and they come out and they put everything in your trunk for you, and it's good to go. I'm pretty sure you pay online beforehand, so you don't even need to worry about that at the store. So if you're concerned with going out, you're concerned with getting into your car, don't want to expose yourself to a viral load, or you don't want to expose others, well, the collection of your groceries is a possibility. But I have heard, particularly here in Norfolk, where I'm living, that there's quite a demand for it. So rumor has it you're going to be waiting a couple weeks. You may as well start ordering your future groceries from now. All right. And you know what? I don't know if anyone has done this yet. And I'll go out on a limb here. And I want to thank, of course, all of our frontline workers who have stayed active and in the limelight of all of this and exposed themselves to risk to help others, whether you're a public official, whether you are a nurse or a doctor or somebody working in the healthcare field, whether you're a police officer or firefighter or paramedic, you are on the front lines. You are exposed to this more so than anyone. So I just want to thank you for continuing to do your work and putting yourself out there for all Canadians. But in addition, I want to thank our fellow grocer or grocers, because people working at the grocery store, people working in these essential businesses, they don't often get the acknowledgement that they deserve. They're putting themselves at risk, and they don't have to be, yet they are. So thank you so much for continuing to help out. Thank you to our truck drivers who continue to make this country go. Without you, there would be no goods and services. There would be no food on the shelf in the grocery store. So I want to thank everybody involved behind the scenes in making that happen and keeping our society rolling along, even if it's just kind of slowly chugging. It is appreciated and, of course, necessary. People apparently have taken to stealing the coronavirus. Yeah, who would have thought? You can look it up. People are going into hospitals and trying to sometimes successfully steal samples of the coronavirus. Why? I don't know. Go get somebody to cough in your face if you really want it that badly. Seriously, I don't understand the point of this. Do not play with fire. It could very well be, this is our fault for maybe testing viruses and such. I'm not saying it is, but certainly stranger things have happened. And if anybody should be doing any kind of testing on this, it's a medical professional or scientist. You or I have no business going into a medical facility and taking anything that doesn't belong to us. First of all, stealing is not my cup of tea. Second of all, leave it to the professionals. Okay? You don't know what you're doing. I don't want you taking anything, spreading it around foolishly. Only fools scorn knowledge. Heed the knowledge I'm giving you. I will not be happy. So I've been asked by Rose. Rose is one of our viewers. Rose has asked me about local measures taken against COVID-19. Well, Rose, Haldimand, Norfolk, we live in Haldimand, Norfolk in Ontario, Canada. The Haldimand, Norfolk Health Unit has released a bunch of stuff on their website that you can check out. Obviously, the same rules that apply to the rest of Ontarians apply to us. We're not supposed to gather in 5 or more in a group. So just keep that in mind in terms of safety. And really, it's for everyone's best interest. Some people are going crazy with this idea of, well, that's infringing upon my right to gather. Well, sure, maybe, but what about your right not to get the coronavirus? It's your choice, right? You do as you please. I can't force you not to gather, but it's in your best interest to follow these guidelines. And that's why they're starting to get a little bit more serious. So just like the rest of Ontario, here in Haldimand, Norfolk, we're not supposed to gather in numbers 5 or greater. You want to take those precautions to heart, heed them, do not take them lightly, I think. One thing I don't necessarily agree with, and you could tell me what you think, is here locally, they've now set up a hotline where you can call in, and I don't want to call it like a tattletale line, but you can call in and tell on your neighbors if you think that they're violating the rule. So for me, I wouldn't be picking it up and, looking outside and be like, oh, John is out there mowing his lawn. I'm going to call because maybe John, needs to mow his lawn to stay sane. Maybe that's what's keeping him going. But he's not out there with 12 people. He's not really breaking any rules. He's maybe just doing something you wouldn't do. Well, that doesn't justify, I think, calling. Where it's justified, I believe, is when you see people with a blatant disregard, people hosting extravagant parties or just disregarding everything altogether, disregarding public safety. Public safety is the main issue here. As I said before, I'm not a guy who's all about telling on people, but if I had children and you're putting them at risk, I completely understand. So that number does exist. Please don't abuse it. If you're going to call it for an appropriate reason. And like I said, it's not something you want to take lightly. You can go to the Haldimand Norfolk Health Unit website. Numbers available for you there. Also, here in Haldimand, Norfolk, we got some statistics for you. Got 144 cases thus far, which, I mean, on a national level, it's quite low. 13 people have passed away in Haldimand, Norfolk. 16 people have been recovered in Haldimand, Norfolk. So we're not doing horribly. That said, Ontario's numbers, we're at 7,500 infected, 291 dead. Yesterday, we touched on the fact that if we can keep the deceased under 1,000 by the time we actually hit the end of April, we'll be in better shape moving forward. That's going to change the statistical model moving forward. So 1,000 cases by the end of April, we're on a worst case scenario. 200, we would have been on a best case scenario. We're already at 300 and just about halfway through the month. So we're on course for about 600. It's not ideal. It's not a horribly worst case scenario if things continue the way they are, but it's certainly not ideal. And this whole, stemming the curve, or whatever you want to call it, flattening the curve, is simply about not breaking the healthcare system. The virus is here for a while. It's going to run its course. Some people think, we may as well let it break the healthcare system, rip the Band-Aid off and let the thing just go and get it over with. Whereas other people are like, no, we need to slow this down. It's going to sort of kaput everything if we just open the floodgates. Too much of a bottleneck, too many bottlenecks anyhow. So those are your choices. And we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. We did a little math, and 250,000 people getting $2,000 last week. Well, that's $500 million. Say you quadruple that to 1 million people and $2 billion in one single day, the government just paying out, right? And that would be monthly. That's only if 1 million of 38 million people apply. I heard a few million people have now applied. So I can see this $80-90 billion of stimulus that the government is injecting into the economy evaporating quite quickly. I mean, $4 billion or whatever, or $2 billion going out, for just one set of payments. And this doesn't count any of the healthcare costs, any of the costs for the testing, any of the costs for the reagents, any of the additional costs for the overtime of the people who are putting their lives at risk to be there with you. On the one hand, yes, we don't want to collapse the healthcare system. But on the other hand, the longer that this keeps up, the more debt our country will be in at the end. And the fear is that somewhere along the line, that debt may become unserviceable. So something to keep in mind. Price gouging, illegal in Ontario. If you're caught price gouging, you could be fined up to $100,000. And I'd like to not name a certain gas station in Delhi that was selling tiny little bottles of hand sanitizer the other day for $9.99. I hope you remove that from the shelf, because I didn't call any number, but I'm sure somebody will. So that's not cool. Neither is the case of pop for $34 at a certain convenience store in Simcoe. Not cool. So keep that in mind. I'm watching you. We've got pretty much everything covered here. Going to the Canadian numbers, 25,000 people have actually been infected with COVID-19. Of those 25,000, 780 have perished. So again, certainly not ideal. I mean, just yesterday, those numbers were down like 300 people. 300 people, and overnight that has gone up. It doesn't sound like a lot of people and 38 million people. It doesn't sound like a lot of people and 7.7 billion people. But those are 300 people who were, people's sons and daughters and fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles. When you look at it that way, it seems to really hit home a lot harder. 300 people have lost a loved one this morning. 300 more people in Canada. So keep that in mind as you make your decisions. Keep that in mind as you go about your day to day. You may not believe in the virus. A lot of people don't. You may not think that you are susceptible to the virus, even if you do believe in it. A lot of people don't. But you may also love your family. You may also care for your important people in your life. So if not for yourself, do it for them. Keep them out of harm's way. Don't take foolish chances with their lives. Until next time, I'm Michael Badaway. Take care of yourself and each other.